What is going on, everybody? I'm Tyler and welcome back to the shop. Today I want to tell you about a new toy that I got here, which is the Harvey HW110S 36-inch. This thing is a monster. It has a dovetail trunnion system and a 4 horsepower motor. It is a beast. You guys all remember the Delta contractor saw that was in my shop for many years. This went from the old shop and then we brought it up to this new one as well. It is really no comparison to this new Harvey. The horsepower is so much different, the stability and weight of the saw is so much different, and I do gotta say, it's not necessarily apples to apples comparisons of these two saws, because one is a contractor saw and one is a cabinet saw. Made for different reasons. Obviously they're both table saws, but the cabinet saw is made for much more industrial use, and my goodness, the Harvey is a beautiful piece of machinery. The table saw came very well packed and protected on a single pallet delivered by a semi truck. They were able to get a lift gate for me and roll it right up to where you see it right here. Compass, topic of such controversy. Some of y'all might know what I'm talking about, but right when I got this saw in, I was watching videos from Stumpy Nubs and from the Wood Whisperer, the Wood Whisperer had some issues with his Harvey compass miter gauge. Stumpy Nubs has had a couple for a couple of years, and just a little joke right there. But so far, having gotten my compass in, pretty awesome so far, especially compared to what I was used to. We got a thunderstorm going on outside too. You can see I have Jonathan the tractor in the background. Originally I was thinking I would lift the table saw up and then just set it right down on these rollers, but I was able to use the leverage of the machine itself to rock the table saw around, which was on its own separate pallet, and move these 1,000-pound weight-bearing rollers, which were a Harbor Freight special. They were at our old house when we bought them, and I've used these things multiple times since then. But I was able to rock the table saw right up on there, and and when I say just, I mean like an 1/8 of an inch more, we would not have been able to get. I would have had to take the frame off the door to get this table saw into the shop. So it's funny how we've had so many situations like that where it's been just by an 1/8 of an inch, just by a 1/4 inch that something fits. So what is the difference between these saws? But first of all, let's just take a look at the old Delta. You can see the wheels there that miter the blade and raise it up and down. And I set my hand up on there. You can just see how much different it is when we look at the new Harvey. And the contractor saw is a tabletop mounted trunnion system. So what raises and lowers and miters the blade is attached right to the table. So if you pull that table off, the whole mechanism comes with it. And then the mechanism that raises and lowers the blade is kind of an articulating arm like you see right here. This is a very different design on the Harvey. Harvey does have a design that's more like this, but I opted to go with their dovetail system, which is a little more stable. So the big difference with the contractor saw is take a look at that wheel right there. My hand can barely go around it, whereas it easily went over the Delta saw. So the trunnion system for a cabinet saw is mounted to the cabinet instead of mounted to the table. So if you were to take the table off, the whole system, the blade, the motor stays in place on the cabinet so you can make adjustments, which I had to do very little. And here you can see the dovetail system. So it's a sliding dovetail that raises the blade directly up and down instead of articulating it up. And Harvey claims that this just makes everything a little bit more accurate and a little bit more stable. And just look at the beefiness of everything underneath here. Those trunnions where the blade miters over, so much bigger, and as you could see down there as well, the dust collection goes right up around the blade, which I'm very excited for. So instead of having to evacuate all of the dust out of the entire cabinet, you just have to focus around the area around the blade, which closes up very small. Alrighty, first things first, we're going to put the chute on the back so that we can connect our 4-inch dust collection hose, and it does have an offshoot pipe which goes to an overarm dust collection mechanism, which actually I didn't think I was going to use very much, but I ended up using it quite a bit so far. So Ethan and I were able to tip the saw, again using leverage and a little bit of brute strength to get those rolling pallets off from underneath the table saw. And then again, we're just gonna rock the table saw right off the pallet very slowly, kind of work it down using some 2x4s to safely get it off the pallet. And we were successful. No pulled back muscles and nothing broke. You like it?
Yeah.
Nice and shiny, huh? Super shiny. Nice. So what do we have for a manual in this Harvey package? It's a well-printed manual, feels good in your hand, but I do gotta say, it seems a little bit weak to me. There were a few steps, especially when mounting the rails for the fence, that I had to take a leap of faith and just kind of go with what I thought made sense for the bolts that I needed to use. But we'll show that in a little bit. But the rest of it, pretty straightforward. We needed to add the wings of the table saw to get started, the wings of the table. And to do that, I just clamped some 2x4s to the existing table that was already in place. And this allows us to set the very heavy cast iron wings on either side and then bolt them into place. And you might wonder, why is the table gold? And that's because this has a titanium nitride coating on here. Harvey claims that this makes it a little bit easier to slide material across it, and it prevents the table from corroding, which I can tell you that I haven't seen any rust on this, and we are in a relatively high humidity season right now, although I do keep the shop relatively stable. I will say though that it doesn't seem like material slides across this quite as well as the old cast iron Delta table saw. So the wings went on relatively easily, and I did use a dead blow mallet to gently tap things into place so that we were nice and flush, obviously plumb across the top, and then I didn't want anything to catch on the front and back of the wings as well. Now, if you look closely when I stick a level across the entire table, the bigger wing on the right side, even with the bolts nice and tight, was not plumb with the rest of the table. So I needed to tip it up a little bit. I have seen some people use tape to do this, and here you can see that discrepancy up close. But I didn't want to use tape because that, I assume, will compact and flex over time. So I had some leftover tape measure material, which I believe I used when I built the miter saw station way back in the day, and this is metal. So basically what I did was loosen up those bolts a little bit, articulate the table up, and then slide 2 sleeves of this tape measure material under there, bolted everything down, and it was absolutely perfectly flat when we're talking about the table. So that worked out great, and I don't think that will compact over time and cause the table to droop. And these are the bolts that I was talking about for the fence rail system. In the manual, it doesn't tell you which of these triplets of bolts to use. So I just kind of went with my intuition and used what I thought was best for the front and back rails. Everything worked out well, but that's like the little things that you would think for a $4,000 table saw would be called out in a manual. And just in case you were curious, I will let Harvey know about this. They are going to review this video before it is posted, and we'll see if they actually go through and fix something like that as time goes on. Again, Harvey gave me this saw. It's a $4,000 saw, but all of these opinions are my own. And when I signed the agreement with Harvey, I specifically called out that I will give them every opportunity to fix a problem if I did find one, but the opinions were going to be my own, and I wasn't going to read off a sheet for them. So everything you see here is my own opinion. And I'm highly impressed. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet where we go through the accuracy of this saw. So what am I doing right now? I'm installing the front and back rails, which allow the B-spire style fence, T-style fence to go sliding on these. It is a heavy fence, and it slides wonderfully. My brother-in-law was up here. We built an entire kitchen in a week using this saw, and he was super impressed with how well the heavy-duty fence moved. This is the first power up. Ethan and I are both very, very impressed how quiet the saw is. It did have a little oil on the arbor, which made me jump when we first turned it on. And I'm just taking a peek at how much it dims the lights when we power it up. And I would say it's no more than my previous saw, even though this is almost double the horsepower. Nice, smooth, very quiet motor. Super excited to put this to good use. out to the right hand side of the cast iron titanium nitride tables, there is a smaller, it is a metal and plastic combination, metal and composite combination table wing that goes out to the end of the table saw fence system. This just bolts in place. You want to make sure it's nice and flush with the top of your cast iron table because the fence does slide across here and you don't want it to catch. While you're down in that area, you can put the brackets in place and slide the overarm dust collection bracket, overarm dust collection tube, I guess we can call it, into place while you're down there. So now we have the saw together and it's time for the exciting part of seeing how accurate this saw is out of the box. So I know this digital gauge should be absolutely perpendicular to that arbor to make sure that it's nice and square, but you can't get it down in there. But wildly impressed. If you go back and rewatch that part, there is zero play. Down to the thousandths of an inch. Zero play in that arbor. So that means we're going to get a nice, good, stable spin on our table saw blade. Now, the flange and the bolt that actually hold the blade to the arbor has some bolts in here because as you can see, the blade on the right is from Harvey and they have some extra holes in there. And those bolts would slide into that to make sure that the blade didn't somehow spin. But I want to use some of my Amana blades which don't have those extra holes in them. So you can just remove those Allen screws and slide the flange on the arbor and the bolt and you're ready to go. If you wanted to go back to a Harvey style blade, which they do sell some high quality blades, you can just slap those little bolts back in and you are ready to go. Tighten everything down with the supplied wrenches, and very exciting, we're going to put in my first riving knife, which was a big reason why I wanted to upgrade the table saw. Riving knife slides in, you slide that little clip one way or the other, and you are ready to go. Now, we're checking for 90 degrees on the blade with this machinist square, and as you can see, absolutely perfect. And then we're going to make sure that the angle gauge on the front of the saw lines up to that 90 degrees just right. Let's check the blade. We want to use the same tooth just in case there's any discrepancies in the blade. But as you can see here, perfect. 0 thousandths of an inch. Nothing between front and back of the blade when I spin it one way or the other. Now I'm going to use this digital angle gauge. We're going to reference off the table, put it 90 degrees or reset it to 0 like I did on the blade. And then we're going to miter over to 45, and we want to make sure two things. First, that the stops built into the saw stop us at 45 degrees, and then that the gauge in the front there references that measurement, that angle correctly. All right, let's get our heavy Harvey T-style fence into place. This has two ways it can be mounted, with a low rail and a high rail. I typically leave it on a high rail. If you have a bunch of small stuff, you can rotate the fence 90 degrees. It's like a aluminum extrusion, and get it right where you want. But we're doing a couple of things. We're making sure that the fence is perpendicular to the table, so 90 degrees, and then we're going to use the miter gauge with the dial indicator on there to make sure that the fence, if anything, is a couple thousandths away from the blade front to back. It was perfect, and I did not do any adjustments out of the box. This is how it came off that pallet. Wonderful accuracy off of this saw. And I'm ecstatic. You can see my face when I'm cutting this. This is a piece of hickory. I'm making sure we don't have any swirl marks on that wood, and then just so much power. Even though that was only about a 1/6 piece of hickory, the saw didn't even care. So what are we doing now? We need to go in and we need to actually set a tape measure on the rail of the table saw. So I am using my digital calipers to make sure I'm cutting something, a piece of wood, down to a relative measurement. I chose 2 inches, and then we're going to make sure that the fence is right in the same spot, and we can set the tape, which is just a 3M sticky back adhesive on the back of that tape. We can make sure we set it into place, and then we have some fine adjustments in the indicator window of the fence to make sure we are exactly where we want to go. Once we got the fence where we want it, we slowly peeled back that adhesive backing, and then Ethan used the brayer roller to make sure we had good contact, and I just slowly worked my way through, making sure that we laid that tape out nice and even on the fence top so that it looked good. And then we can do a couple of test cuts to make sure we verify our measurements are correct, our placement of the fence is correct, and we are absolutely bang on, just like I like it. Do you need to do woodworking with digital calipers and dial indicators? Absolutely not, but that tickles my inner engineer right there, and it makes me happy, so we're going to carry on. So at this point, the table saw is set up and it is proved to be accurate and ready for use. When you purchase a Harvey table saw, you get their compass miter gauge, which is a high quality piece of kit. Just look at the box that it comes in, and the packaging, the display is very, very good. It's all extruded aluminum. You got some anodized red in there, which looks fantastic. Positive stops. So far, I have found this to be very, very accurate. Now, I used a relatively sloppy, very, very cheap miter gauge that came with the Delta table saw before, so this is a huge step up for me, and I may not be noticing slight discrepancies that someone like Mark the Wood Whisperer may notice, especially when he was comparing high-end tools, but so far I have found this to be deadly accurate. I've tried to do some miters with this just for testing. They're absolutely perfect. Very excited to have this in the shop. As you can see there, it has a stop system built right into it, and it has micro adjustments right there, so that's pretty cool. Again, tickles my inner engineer. Very excited to put this to use for many, many years in the shop. At this point, everything is ready to go, and I just want to make sure we protect the new tool in the shop and spray some of my PB Dry Blaster on here, and this is just going to prevent any rust, and it also is a dry lubricant so that it allows the material to slide over the table saw quite a bit easier. It is silicone free, so it won't ruin any of the finish of the wood that we slide over this table.
Well, the new saw is set up. It is a monster. Right now I don't have the guard on there. I'm not sure how often I'll run with the guard for video purposes, although if I'm doing a lot of ripping, I'll probably put it on so that I can utilize the overarm dust collection system and cut down on some of that dust that is flying in the air. Obviously, a huge shout out to Harvey Industrial, Harvey Woodworking for making their Alpha Series saw a staple, a centerpiece of the DIY Tyler shop. This thing is going to stay for generations in my family, and I'm very excited to put it to use. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you check out the links down in the description if you want to learn more about these awesome pieces of machinery. I'm DIY Tyler. You guys have a good one.